Hello, everybody, and welcome to the call. I'm Jeff Starlata from Beyond the Range, and again, we have another exciting training video for you. Today, we're going to be working with retired U.S. Marshal Charlie Moore. Charlie, welcome to the call today.
Hey, Jeff, how are you? Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, we appreciate you being here. So today, I wanted to talk a little bit about learning to shoot around objects and canting a firearm. And what I mean by that, we'll show you a video in a second, but I have a laser training gun here. It's not a real firearm, so just so you guys are aware of that. But when I am working around an object, many people kind of think about coming out traditionally, like an isosceles stance, or maybe their weaver stance, whatever they're comfortable with, but they're keeping that firearm vertical, which means if I'm coming around, half my body is going to be exposed, or pretty close to half, in order to have that firearm aiming at the proper target. But when we talk about canting it a little bit to the side, I'm able to still kind of keep a good solid structure, but also at the same time eliminate some of my body being exposed. So let me show you the video first, and then I'll kind of come back and we'll talk from there. But in the video, the first two shots, Charlie, is going to be me coming around a wall, keeping that firearm vertical. Now, I don't expose my legs. I don't step out with my leg in a traditional full isosceles stance, but I'm kind of like leaning to the side a little bit with a vertical firearm. And then the second two shots are going to be me canting it or rotating it a little bit more horizontally and kind of leaning just a little bit. And then we're going to talk about the structure of your stance. We're going to talk about other things in a second. So let's take a second here to watch the video. I'm going to do one on one side and one on the other. And again, this is more vertical for the first two shots. And the second two are going to be with a little bit of a cant to it.
All right, sir.
So that was the first one with the gun being vertical. And you see on this one, I have to adjust in order to be able to hit the target. There's the second one with the gun being vertical. Now I'm going to cant it a little bit to the side. You see I'm barely exposed on that one, and I did fire a shot, and then canting one to the side here as well. All right, so I'm going to play that one more time.
Yes, sir.
So here's the first one. I want to go back and pause that. So this is the first one, and as you can see, I have quite a bit here exposed coming around the target. Not a lot, but enough that it is a little bit of a concern. And then going to the other side, I have to adjust in order to be able to hit the target. But now I did not switch hands, so this is still me being right-handed, but shooting off towards my left side with it. And you see, I do have to expose quite a bit here in order to really get on target. Then the second set, I'm coming around and firing with just exposing this a little bit. And that's the firearm right there in my eyes. So it's kind of concealing me pretty decent in that sense. And then going to the second side, same thing, firearm and eyes come around together and shot. So Charlie, I want to talk about this a little bit because let me get back to the regular screen here. There we go. I think a lot of people, and I know this is a competition. In competition, they teach you to still have a good, solid square stance and shoot from a traditional isosceles stance or whatever it might be that you normally work from, but you got to have a good base. The challenge with it, if you talk about tactically, is the exposure of what you're exposing out there. So let me throw it to you a little bit, Charlie. Why is this important to learn some different stances to shoot from?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. And thanks for doing that video. It's very illustrative of what we're going to talk about. You mentioned it, Jeff, and it's kind of like when we teach the martial art, as I know you do, is there a difference between the sport and the street? And both of them have the same objective of hitting our target, per se, in this discussion. But we're using lethal force in this example because something is threatening us, and the least amount of our vital organs in our body that we can expose, the better for us versus the competition analogy that you mentioned. So, it's vitally important that we do keep the factors of stance and accuracy and structure, as you mentioned, but we also have to consider using concealment or cover in this example to our best advantage without sacrificing those other things that you talked about. So all of those things are vitally important to figuring out in this situation, how can we utilize cover, concealment, and our weapon to the most advantageous position for ourselves. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And is there going to be a perfect way? Absolutely not. But you got to consider lots of folks take a look at these things and shooting around cover or angles from the perspective of a law enforcement officer or a military or soldier is you're sacrificing one thing that most of us in the civilian world don't have body armor on. So we can't, not that they want to expose it either, but we don't have that luxury 99.9% of the time in the civilian world to maybe step out a little further.
Yeah, you don't want to risk anything, that's for sure.
Exactly. So it's taking those things, taking the advantage and taking a look at how can we be a little more safer without sacrificing those other things that we all need in firearms, accuracy, speed, and all those other things. So I think this is a great video to illustrate that in putting it into our toolbox or our skill set. So. Okay,
so I remember training with you in all of your classes, you kind of joke around and you say the firearm will still work when it's horizontal. And I think that's an important part is when you are dealing with it is you have to understand that sometimes you may have to cant that firearm a little bit to the side to get around that object. Last time you were up with us, we did some shooting from like a laying down position.
Correct.
And you were almost pretty much laying on our sides. I mean, we had some drills, we were up on our elbow, things like that, and kind of working from the side, but that firearm was definitely canted to the side. We weren't horizontal and the firearm had to be vertical. So we were kind of shooting from different angles the whole day. And I want to talk about this a little bit. We're not going to go 100% horizontal. I mean, there's no way I can lean that far and keep a good solid base. But I may have to just kind of lean my body over my leg, support myself a little bit on that one support leg, and then cant that firearm a little bit to the side. What am I going to lose as far as stability in my stance, as far as accuracy? What do you think the challenges with this are going to be?
Well, the challenges are to explore what you do sacrifice. So we're all different. We all have different body types and different structures and different abilities. And like you mentioned, Jeff, and this is ideal way to practice it or think about it is, should my concepts and principles of this tactic or tool or technique be the same prone, as you mentioned, kneeling and standing, utilizing cover or concealment or barrier or obstacle? Is how can I keep that structure without sacrificing it and also utilize, as you mentioned, the cover, concealment, barrier, barricade? And so the ideal way is you have to get out there and experiment. You have to see what's comfortable for you and what works for you. How you stand is probably a little bit different than how I stand. But like you said, all joking aside, it's a round circle and the projectile comes out. Ideally, I would use everything that I have and use the weapon in the conventional means. We're talking about a non-ideal situation, meaning lethal force. So as you did, again, safe training weapon is keeping in mind my foot doesn't want to be past the obstacle, in this case, a corner of my home, and getting my stance and my structure as a demo out there. And another thing to mention, Jeff, when the guys are training is it does us no good to have an obstacle, a barrier, or whatever, and put rounds into it, which we've all seen at the range and maybe even done ourselves now and then. Those are wasted rounds in a lethal force situation. So the weapon has to be out past that so we don't have that. The structure has to be the same. And as you mentioned and illustrated in that video, is that can't be accomplished. My stance is a little wider than shoulder width. If I can move the camera down a little bit, Jeff, maybe that'll help our audience. A little wider than shoulder width, solid structure. I tend to, and maybe you do the same or different, turn my outside leg, if you will, in this case, my right leg from the camera and the furthest leg. So I have more structure so I can shoot past it. I'm still looking at my front sight, but I don't want to get my head so far offline that it's exposed. Trying to find that front sight is I'm looking through the sight in this frame here. Let me get back to that normal standard right here, looking through to the front sight. So I think it's ideal. We can't sacrifice, as I mentioned, I can't say this enough, and you did, we can't sacrifice structure and all the concepts and principles of good firearms training so much that we lose things. And you did a great job illustrating it. Canting like this is crazy. You're losing everything just to have so much less exposed. So it's going to take some time to take these principles and concepts of our video and practice dry firing with a safe weapon and then take it up to live fire like you did, and then take it up to simulations and things like that down the road.
Right. So, and I'll be honest with you, I went to the range with a person who does some competition. He's just kind of getting into it. He's traditionally coming out with that isosceles stance right beyond the wall and exposing himself. But in those type of situations, nobody's shooting back at you. And he totally accepts that, and he's good with it. But I do find that whenever I work with anybody on this, we're talking about laser guns, the live fire, whatever, is they have the tendency to come around the corner, and it's going to be hard because I don't really have a corner here, but you can picture a wall coming down. They stick the firearm out first and kind of angle it down, and then they kind of take their head and poke it around, but there's no solid structure here. If you look, I've kind of got my wrist curled and everything, and then they end up shooting off on strange angles because they don't have that solid structure. So this should all kind of work the same, tipping to the side. It shouldn't be the firearm and then my head. So Charlie, is there any way that they can practice this a little bit with having that good solid structure and leaning without overleaning? I guess the question is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and a lot of it is going to do with body type. Some folks can't move that well. They don't have that torso, the ability to flex that much from the torso. Some going to have to do with, legs and things. But think of it as anything when you teach the martial art comes from the ground up. It comes from the ground up. Again, I'm going to move that camera a little bit so the audience can see it. So when I use this imaginary line from where my wall ends straight across, that's kind of where I line my foot up to practice. So I put my foot here, and this leg is going to have to figure out too close together. I feel like I'm skiing or surfboarding. So I do have a wider stance, and I've learned how to use distance because we call this, and I'll illustrate a little bit better when we have the regular conventional camera view, is from the feet. Sometimes it doesn't have to be perfectly parallel. You may have to learn how to adjust and how it feels. I feel too far leaning. I feel this, and everybody's going to feel a little bit different. Is how to get that structure and be able to engage without sacrificing that the body mechanics that we've been talking about. But now we can see the wall, and what happens, I believe, instinctually, because we're all humans and we all have something that's threatening us coming this way, is we do what humans do is I'm going to suck up to cover, we call it. So if I get way up here because something's bad here, I lose a lot of visual thing. And I'm not saying we all don't do it, because we do. But that goes to what you're saying. I try to stick the gun around. My wrist is canted quite substantially, and I don't have an angle at what I'm aiming at. So it's learning proxemics, how far we are from that obstacle, and how we can adjust. And it's going to take not a lot, but it's going to take some time on your own to figure it out. But I think we got to build from the ground up rather than just canting from the hips. I've got to move my feet. How does my platform begin at the ground all the way up, just like we would do conventional? So,
well, I think that's a great point. And what we're going to do, actually, I've already talked to you about, is we're going to come back and do a video on how to cant that firearm and approach it, angle and everything. Before we finish up this call, first of all, the importance of learning to cant a little bit and shoot is very important. People just don't understand those tactical skills that could save your life. So I think that is important. But one question is going to come up as you talk about getting that firearm slightly past that wall so you don't put a hole in it. I know somebody's going to comment on this and they're going to say, well, if you put that firearm beyond the wall, somebody's going to grab that gun. Well, I just kind of want to address that issue. Is if I'm going into a room, first of all, I should be back away from that corner like you were just talking about, slicing that pie to kind of get a wider angle of view and everything. And if I need to shoot around the corner, that's one thing. But if I'm engaged where I'm behind cover concealment and I have somebody already firing at me, I already have a general proximity where they are. So in that case, sticking my gun around the corner by an inch or so is not going to make that big of a difference. Any comments on that before people start mentioning that?
No, I agree. And I see it quite frequently down here at the training center. One is because when we train, we generally, I know it's happened, but I don't think it's happened like we visualize. I don't think anybody was shooting. Like you said, if I'm shooting around the corner, I'm here because my perceived threat, rather perceived or actual, is somewhere down there.
Right.
If that's true, that would mean the shooter is, let's say, 20 yards down that way, and he's got a buddy that's standing next to the wall up here ready to grab my gun. It doesn't make any sense. And to be honest, other than in some training where people are having fun, if you will, which we all should do in training, I've never heard of anybody grabbing a gun like that. I'm sure somebody has. You know, there's thousands of events that happen. Usually I've heard about it with a long gun. You're pointing at someone and they grab it. I've heard that. But I've not heard of somebody around the corner, like you said, because it goes to what you said. In reality, my threat is at a distance. That's why you're behind this cover and doing what you're doing. It's not generally here. And like you said, we're only talking, so the barrel is past whatever we're shooting from.
Right.
We're not talking about sticking a weapon 4 feet out there. I agree with you, buddy. It's out there, and somebody's going to say, you know, I still aren't going to do it, and that's fine. But my thing is, if you have 12 rounds and you put 3 of them into that, you might as well have a 9-round magazine.
Right, exactly. Of course, unless you're in New York and you only have a 7-round magazine anyhow. So, all right, Charlie, I want to thank you for that, for the call today. Like I said, we're going to do another video coming up on actually how to do this and how to train with this and how to be more successful with it. I know we touched about some base of our stance and our leading a little bit, but I think the next video will get a little more details on the how to. But thanks for being here today, and I look forward to our next call.
Thank you, sir. Good. Have a great day.